David Buckland wants to turn the tide on climate change. He's bringing together scientists and artists to make that happen. And joining us now to tell us more about what he hopes to achieve, David Buckland, founder of the Cape Farewell Project. And we welcome you to this studio on this side of the pond, actually.
Great, Stephen, to be with you.
Nice to have you here. Well, let's just, because our viewers may not know much about you, so tell us about you. What kind of art do you do?
Basically, oh God, they call it lens-based art. So it's anything that comes through the lens. So it can be photography, video, anything that comes through the lens.
That's your thing.
And I've had big shows, National Portrait Gallery, blah, 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 was working very happily as an artist, and then started this extraordinary project.
Cape Farewell.
Cape Farewell.
What is that?
Well, Cape Farewell actually is physically the bottom of Greenland. It is the Cape Farewell. And what we named our project about is this kind of word, Cape Farewell. And farewell is, we can either go well into the future, farewell into the future, or farewell, you're on a tide of no return.
I am such a pessimist that I did not appreciate the
good part.
The good part. I thought, why is he naming his organization after saying farewell to the planet?
Yeah, no, this is...
But you want us to fare well.
This is the whole double entendre. Anyway, and then the other one is if you're a sailor, which I am, and, a cape, you don't hang around off a cape. You decide to go one way or the other. So we're kind of like at a watershed. That's the metaphor of the name.
And as Greenland would suggest, you've got a real connection with the Arctic. And tell us why you wanted to bring artists up there.
I started as an artist. I started working. I was very interested in the dialogue between science and art. And I started working with climate scientists, oceanographers. And this is 12, 15 years ago. And they said, David, we have this big story to tell about climate. Why is nobody listening to us? And their information is data and it's graphs and it's hard to understand. And the media weren't picking up with it. And when they brought it out into the public goes, I don't get it. So I thought, well, okay, can we find another language? Can we take their information and turn it around through the creativity of the artists, the writers, the filmmakers, lens-based artists, painters, and find a different language of communicating what is happening in the Arctic, essentially.
And have you been able to?
I think we've been pretty successful. I'd never imagined that 12 years down the line I'll still be running with this project. I would never imagine that it would be truly international. And I wouldn't, the product that's come out of it has been extraordinary.
The product meaning the art that's been created?
The art that's, we've done major exhibitions at the Natural History Museum that have toured the world. We've done films, 2 major films that have been on television. And Ian McEwan's book, Solar, is all based on... This
is Mr. Atonement, Ian McEwan.
Mr. Atonement, but, Mr. Solar, actually. It's a great book, but, he based that whole experience by coming up to the Arctic with us.
Can you tell whether you're changing the hearts and minds of people around the world?
You have kind of, these big survey reports, and they did a survey in England, I think it was last year, and apparently 92% of the people in England accept that climate change is a reality, and also over 50% say we've got to do something about this from the public first. So now that's not all down to my organization. There's been a big movement in England to work on this, but I think people have changed. I think that the weather situations are convincing people that something strange is going on, and that the climate agenda and what the scientists have been trying to tell us all the years is there. It's something that we have to take note of.
It snowed in April in Toronto.
Well,
right?
I always imagined it snowed in April. More astounding. Last week in London, it was snowing as well. And we've just had 0 temperatures. Record floods in England, droughts in America, United States, where big weather events are happening.
Hurricanes, tornadoes, everything. It's a very odd time.
And it's everything that, the scientists just said, that you're going to get a destabilized weather system. And that's what we've got.
Now, you take the artists to the Arctic because you want them to see what in particular?
I think it's really, the Arctic is an inspiring place. Anybody who's been up to the Arctic, it's like, it's like an addiction almost. You want to return there. It's just a fantastic place. At the same time, you're trying to understand it through the eyes of the scientist. So when we have the oceanographers up there, we're working, trying to understand how the seas work. At the same time, you have marine biologists, so you're trying to understand all of the little creatures there. At the same time, geologists, and why are the glaciers disappearing? Why is that whole system, why is the temperature risen, 5-6 degrees on average above normal why is all the ice going at the North Pole? You know, that working in the field with the scientists is a huge luxury. It's a real benefit for the artist. And they're there just to zap it all up, you know, just like a sponge, absorb all this information. And then the ask is, okay, can you think about making a piece of art that actually somehow communicates what's been going on?
Tells this story.
Tells the story, narrates the story. And they're, you know, these narrations that have come out of the project have just captured the imagination of people worldwide. So that's great.
You switched to Scotland, and I want to have our control room bring up some pictures of Scotland, which you'll see on the monitors here, and then maybe you can take us through these and tell us what we're seeing. So here's number one.
Well, this is the boat we traveled in. It's an I-4 boat. We chartered this boat and we went all the way up the west coast of Scotland. An extraordinary vessel for us all to be on. We had 4 separate crews. We did interchange of crews. Scotland was a big story. We decided about 5 or 6 years ago to stop the agenda of saying, wait a minute, does climate change, is it a reality or not a reality? But saying, well, what can we do about it? Where are the solutions? And that's what we looked at. And instead of going up to the Arctic, because you know the ice is melting and you know it's a given fact now, but where are the communities that are trying to do something? And extraordinary, I mean, what happened in Scotland, I think you're going to come up with a little image at the moment of this island of Egg. And it was, you know, it's a tiny island, and it was it was owned by a laird, and the little community of people managed to raise, I think, £2 million to actually buy it off the laird. And at the same time, they were thinking, you know, they were very committed to trying to make themselves, I mean, extraordinary, beautiful place, tiny little house, community of 500 or 600 people on the island. And what they've done is to make themselves completely independent in terms of energy. So they use both wind and solar. Every house gets a 4.5 kilowatt quota of electricity per day.
And they stick with it.
It is, you know, you're in Scotland. This is a tough environment. I mean, you know, Canada's tough, but this place is tough. And they're fine. Nobody complains. They can find a way of insulating their houses, making the whole thing work.
So they're doing their bit.
And it's an, you know, it's an inspiration.
What's this beach here?
This beach is the little islands. We went up to Kilda, which is an amazing group of islands, island off Scotland, and then this is another island. I think they're called the Monarch Islands. Again, depopulated, but again, you know, part of that continuing story. I mean, it's extraordinary. This year we're going up to the Orkneys and Shetlands. And, you know, the Orkneys, wild north of Scotland. And, you know, the big debate there is that all of the new wave technology, all the new wave energy systems are coming and they're going to be built off Orkney. But this is fine. You think this is a good thing, but the scale of imposition on the people of Orkney is huge. So what's the debate between the people of Orkney? How are they going to cope with this tremendous influx of new technology, new energy? Is it a good thing and is it a bad thing? And then Shetland is all about the fishing industry. You know, how do you have a sustainable? So we're talking about people now. We're talking about communities, and can we learn from these far-flung communities and bring it in to, you know, the societies in which we live here?
One quick word on this before we leave this part of our discussion. You picked Toronto as the North American capital for your organization. Yeah. How come?
Historically, actually, you used to have your previous mayor, Mayor Miller, was chair of the C40 Cities program. And I think the C40 Cities program was probably the most advanced and hopeful and optimistic kind of way that you could think about making a global treaty or a global arrangement. And he was chair, and we were working very closely with it. And, you know, the idea is if you can get each of the major cities of the world to lower their carbon footprint, then you're on, you know, on course to solve the problem. And we did a big festival in London, and David Miller came across to the festival when he was still mayor and just saw that, you know, by bringing the whole of the population of London in and saying, wait a minute, this is an exciting story, you can be part of it, you can do it through music, comedy, exhibitions, and that. So he thought, you know, he understood the power of the cultural voice in engaging the cities that he cares about and actually bringing this debate in, which is, so therefore when we are not going to achieve any kind of really great result in this internationally unless North America, Canada, US are part of the story.
Sure.
And so therefore, you know, Toronto was just obvious home to come to.
Okay. Tell me this. There feels to me like an incongruity in some of what you're trying to do. You'll explain to me why it isn't, but let me put the premise out there anyway. Art is very much subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. It hits at your emotions, hopefully, if it's good. Science is just the facts, ma'am. It is all supposed to be objective criteria, and I'm trying to understand how these two intermix with each other to create a common message.
When I started, I said I started because I was really fascinated to work with scientists. And if you go back to the Victorian age, you always used to have the Royal Academy of the Science and the Arts. And then in the early 1900s, the two camps got specialized. They moved separately into separate quarters. I always think that's a very sad affair. And so therefore, I really tried to bring the two back into the same camp. So to me, it's a logical process. The science, you know, you say a fact and a fact gets written, but a fact is an ongoing process. You know, the scientists will say, well, all the information we have right now, this is what is happening. But then somebody goes another step further. What we found in the Arctic, which was extraordinary, is that the way the scientists would make a proposition and say, we think this is happening, and then set themselves about proving it, is very, very similar to the way an artist will work. Who comes in, I've got a kernel of an idea, I want to try and form that into a piece of art or a book like Ian McEwan, and then goes through this process. The two processes are not that far apart. And actually the dialogue between the two has been really exciting. Okay, I want you to set up, because we're going to see some more pictures in a second, but I want you to set it up first. Your show at the UK called Earth, Art of a Changing World. What was that about? We did that. It was the Royal Academy. It's one of the biggest galleries in London. Huge chance to showcase. It was right in front of the Copenhagen agreement, or non-agreement as it turned out. We were very optimistic at the time. And I was invited to curate the show for the Royal Academy. And we surveyed all of the artists. And this is interesting because it's not, you know, the artists we work with are all, you know, they can be major, major names, but it's not their criteria just to do climate art. They all have their own careers. Sure. But what is extraordinary, when we trolled around the world internationally, the number of artists that have picked up and been curious about this subject and tried to address it in some form or other, in some kind of cultural way, then that really came through. And when we did the show, there were 34 artists there from around the world who had all addressed this independently or through the K4Well project. Well, let's see some of it here. Control room, if you would. Let's start to bring some of the work up. What's this? Anu Cartoon, I think, lovely, you know, it's just a globe saying, wait a minute, it's just a way of interacting and saying, you know, the planet is extraordinary. If you see it from this side, there's a lot of landmass. The other side, there's hardly any landmass. It's all ocean. It's called hotspot. What's that supposed to refer to? I think the hotspot is, you can see, you know, where are the hotspots? The two hotspots are the Arctic and the Antarctic, but the Arctic mainly. You know, it's just what's happening and to the world. It didn't, again, just an invitation to enter. I mean, we use this piece as the opening of the show. This is about the whole world. There's another. This was a fabulous piece. This was all taken from a fire, one of the major fires they had in I think, in south of the United States, and she collected all of this carbonized wood and made this beautiful kind of installation, which is the kind of the legacy of this fire that came through. I mean, you know, last year or last few years, the amount of fires that have been raging through the United States have been bigger than more, you know, the first. Sure. They've just expanded, and why is that happening? And that she just reflected on that whole dialogue of saying, well, wait a minute, you know, what's happening? That one's called Heart of Darkness. It's not an original title, but that's what you called it. Well, it's fairly clear what she was going to. Indeed. Now, you've got another exhibition coming up in Toronto this fall. Oh, wait a second, is this one more? It's again, I mean, you know, icebergs, again, that reflection of what's happening. What's that made out of? It's a globe, and actually they grow. The chemicals in the water is actually allowing those icebergs to actually grow, and the process is actually watching them, which is an evolving state of you know, of art that's a process rather than just sitting back and saying, you know, it's a static event. It's an evolving process. Okay, we got a couple minutes left, and as I suggested, you've got a show coming here, Toronto, in the fall. Carbon 14, Climate as Culture. What's that about? I mean, again, what you know, this has been a huge experiment. I mean, you know, we have had expeditions into the Arctic and to Scotland, which is the feeding ground for the artists to learn and be inspired by. In Toronto, we didn't go anywhere. We just had this gathering on the lake. And instead of just working with the scientists, we said, well, wait, let's look at whole of culture. You know, where's the economy? Where's the thinking about economy going forward? Where's the thinking about, you know, new technology? Where's the thinking about eco-theology? Where's the thinking about the politics going forward? So we had basically 8 informers, all specialists in their field, and a group of 20 artists, mostly Canadian, but from the United States, Mexico, all gathered together, and big interrogation of the informers and saying, well, okay, the world economy could look like this. A sustainable economy could be like this. Or, you know, the sustainable technology of delivering energy that's not carbon-based could look like this. And from that point on, the artists were invited to team up with their specialists, to team up with the people that they got really involved with, and then create art over a period of 2 years, incubate it, and it's going to be shown at the ROM in October this year.
Oh, fantastic.
So that whole process that they've gone through. And then that's grown because there were some artists there, you know, they're not fine artists, they're not a museum artist. So they were kind of going, well, wait a minute, I want to do a piece of theatre. So we're the Theatre Centre, which is based on Queen. We're doing a whole theatre festival. Other people are doing film, so we're doing a part of a film festival. Planet in Focus is part one.
Multimedia, you're taking over downtown.
And we're a whole 4-month festival. But it's, you know, but the other one we're doing, which is really important, is to have dialogues. You know, that again, to bring these informers back into the stage and the artist, and actually have these dialogues as a public front.
What's the website?
It's Cape Farewell, and I think it says North America, but hopefully it'll come up.
We'll just look up Cape Farewell and figure it out.
Yeah, yeah.
And I hope we do fare well, as opposed to
it's
farewell.
A guarantee. We are faring well.
Good.
And it's also a great inspiration for the next generation coming along. You know, this is about, you know, we all invest in the future. We invest in the education of our jobs, our kids. We do that normally. Well, this is about investing in the future as well. We want a better future, the legacy for our children. We don't want to leave a planet that's trashed. We want to actually leave a place that's good for them to inhabit.
And David,
we're
grateful that you came in today to tell us all about Cape Farewell.
Steve, great. Love to be on the show. Thank you.
David Buckland, thanks so much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.